Okay, welcome everybody. So it's my pleasure to provide you with a little bit of education on crab cakes. I've been told that many of you don't have any exposure to crab cakes, and I think that's kind of fascinating. So we're here to demystify the crab cake. I'm going to start by showing you one of our demo videos, and these are the demo videos that we use for instruction very specifically. So the quality is right up there as far as the content that you're getting. The chef that you're about to see is an expert at crab cakes. This man has made thousands upon thousands upon thousands of crab cakes. So you can't really get a message any better from this man. What we are going to be showing you are the Maryland style crab cakes. Now, if you were going to do like a wiki search or something like that, you're going to have to understand that Maryland and Virginia are basically where crab cakes came from or started from. Um, I believe it was published in a cookbook, I believe around the 1890s, I think, if I remember correctly. Um, Crab cakes can come in all different shapes and sizes. I feel that the Maryland style crab cake is a cleaner, lighter, and more indulgent crab cake than what you'll commonly find outside of the Maryland area. So this crab cake is going to be probably one of the hands down the best crab enthusiast crab cakes you can get. There's less filler. It's a completely different style of crab cake. So when you do get crab cakes out in just the rest of the country outside of Maryland, you'll see that they're formed into like patties, or sometimes they're cylinders, like look like Coke cans. That's how I used to make them before I moved to Maryland. But a Maryland style cake is almost kind of like a half a baseball. And so it's a completely different style. And then also it's prepared a lot differently. You'll find that a lot of the crab cakes across the country, we pan fry them in butter. Sometimes with mine, I used to do a little pan fry in butter on both sides and finish them in the oven nice and gently. But a lot of different kind of styles. The Maryland style crab cake uses significantly less filler. And so it's really a celebration of crab. And so we're here today to celebrate the crab. So I'm going to get into the video, but before we jump into the video, are there any questions right off the bat that I can answer? Okay, none being asked, I will go ahead and start video. Second for everyone to load.
I want to put some gloves on now because some of this is ready to eat food, and the other is I want to be careful about how I'm handling my crab meat because we do have some issues with bare hands associated with cooked crab meat. I don't know if you can notice, but I'm going to show you in detail. I've had my crab meat on ice, and I can't emphasize enough that we need to keep our products, particularly perishable items like shellfish and fish, on ice so they stay nice and cold. And I mean, there's only 8 ounces of crab meat. So I could literally not work anything on ice, take it out of the refrigerator, work it, mix it, and have it right in the oven. But the reality is, when you're out in the field, it's unlikely you're going to be making a half a pound of crab cake. You might be making a 10-pound mix or a 20-pound mix, or depending on your location. We had a place in Harbor Place. I had it for over 25 years, and in the entire time we had the operation, it was right at the end of one of the pavilions at Harbor Place. And the way the menu mix was, there was a tremendous amount of seafood on the menu. But in Baltimore, in the 80s and 90s, what did the tourists come for? They came for crab cake. And we would make crab cakes on sheet pans. Never did the crab cake find a sizzle pan and go in the oven by itself. It would go in on parchment or sprayed, 24 on a sheet pan, and we would do 30 sheet pans a day. And when they came out of the oven, they went into an Alto-Shaam. And as fast as the cooks could get it out of the oven into the Altishan, it went into the dining room. You're talking about $40,000-$50,000 a day, basically, in crab cakes. So the mix there was 75% jumbo lump. I'm sorry, 50% jumbo lump, 50% claw, 25% lump. No, that's wrong. That's 125%. You can't get there. 50% jumbo. That was for texture and visual. 25% claw meat, so it was not in the shell, but outside the shell. It's rather red and rather, it's nice and pink. And then, in order to keep the cost down, we would mix lump into it. So we had 100%, and it's the only way we could afford in those days to sell a crab cake at a price point that we weren't gouging the guest, and we could afford to sell something at $15 for a crab cake.
I want to interrupt just for a quick second and show you, because this is, I feel, a little bit important. One of the things about demystifying a crab cake is knowing what crab to buy, where to buy it, how to buy it, and things like that. So I want to interrupt for just a second to show you kind of where on the crab some of these cuts of crab are coming from. He's talking about the jumbo lump crab right here, and this is the muscle that's attached to the swimmerette of the crab. This is usually the largest piece or portion of meat, other than some of the claws. But this is definitely hands down the most tender, the most succulent, the sweetest, the lightest, beautiful taste and texture that you have. So right here, this jumbo lump is usually your most prized piece. And that's, if you look at, we'll go back to the video, the pieces, those large pieces, that's the jumbo lump crab meat. And that is this piece that hasn't been broken. There's also a classification called colossal, which is essentially the exact same thing. It's just slightly bigger than the jumbo lump, but the same basic premise. They're unbroken muscle groups. Now, what does happen is when he was saying just lump, what he's kind of referring to is that when the processing of this jumbo lump meat, some of these kernels of meat break and little flakes fall off of them. Well, we're not going to throw those away. That now gets resold as just lump meat. So it's slightly lower price. Obviously, the bigger it is, the more intact those pieces are, the more expensive it's going to be. When you start getting into the claw meat, like some of this claw meat, it's very thin and stringy, and not necessarily of a higher value. You know, when you bite into the claw meat, you're going to be biting into that shreddy texture of the crab, as opposed to, you know, when you bite into, say, like a jumbo lump, you're actually biting into a whole portion or nugget of crab meat, and it kind of yields to your bite. So when we start looking at where some of these kind of products come, these are where you have the sources of the meat. So I just want to give you a little heads up on that one before we jump into this, so you understand the context of what he's talking about in the different percentages and why he's saying he'll still use 50% jumbo lump, which makes it still luxurious and elegant and kind of high valued as far as a crab cake goes. But then by using another 25 and 25% of the other two, you can actually get a lot more filler in there. It's still crab, still tastes crabby, but then you can charge a lot less. General food costs. If you want to kind of go about how we do our food costs, like I usually run around 28%. And what that would be is basically dividing the cost of your food by that number. A quick and easy way to do it, and this would be at like 33% food cost, would be just take whatever your cost of your food is and then times it by 3. And that's what we would have to sell it at the restaurant to make even a marginal profit off of. So that's kind of where we get a little bit of premise behind this.
Now, if you go into the marketplace, this lump crab meat is $55 a pound. You can buy it wholesale for about $40 if it's available. So the reality is, if you're serving a 6-ounce crab cake or an 8-ounce crab cake, what's your plate cost going to be? It's astronomical. So you have to be very careful about how you work with that, avoiding breaking up the lumps. So what I have, I don't know if you can tie this in, but these are those jumbo lump from swimming crabs. And normally I would work on ice just to make sure that I am not abusing time and temperature. These are totally cooked ahead of time. They're nice large lumps. Flavor-wise, I haven't tried them, so I can't tell you how crabby they are or how fishy they are. But what I'm looking for is shell, and I'm feeling for cartilage. They've done a very good job of actually picking this, and I did turn it upside down because I'm going to show you in a second why I did. When they process this product and it's pasteurized in this container and sealed. Well, there is some condensation and moisture that comes out, and I want to avoid diluting my crab cake dressing. Otherwise, I would need a lot more breadcrumb to hold it together. And I'm going to show you how much moisture came out of these. Anytime I would use a processed, pasteurized crab meat, I would open up the cans and drain them very carefully. So now I have my lump, happens to be jumbo lump. I have it on ice, and I don't know if you can see this, but let's see how much, can you see all that liquid that's come out? That's how much liquid was in there. If I had this mixed in and I didn't pay attention, all of that liquid would be diluting my crab cake and I would lose the shape. Add too much moisture, and then in order to keep the shape, I would have to add additional filler. I want to avoid that as much as possible. That's something you have to consider when you're working with pasteurized crab meat. This is fine. I can set this aside on ice. I'm not losing any of my temperature. And now we're going to blend together my crab cake sauce. So what we have is a half a cup of mayonnaise. You can certainly make the mayonnaise yourself or use a commercial-based mayonnaise. We have a little bit of Old Bay. I have more than I need, so we're going to season this. A little Worcestershire. Lemon or lemon zest can go in, and in here I have some Dijon mustard. I have a little parsley, a little chopped parsley. I'm going to add a little bit of breadcrumb. Not much to this.
He said nothing.
And now the
Okay.
recipe
Already
calls
asked him.
for half an egg. Obviously, I can't split an egg, so as I mentioned, I'm just going to use an egg white. And the yolk I'll save for something else, creme anglaise, or make a meringue or something. I'll blend this together. I'm going to add a little bit of salt and white pepper. Being careful about the salt because of the nature of the flavor profile created with mustard and Old Bay. So you want to get this balanced. And I'm just going to mix this in. And this should be fairly heavy.
I'll answer the question as soon as he's done
It's
mixing.
much like making an omelet, blend it in really well. Otherwise, you're going to get big spots of egg white in here. Let's see what we have flavor-wise. Haven't added any salt or pepper yet, but we'll take a look. Yeah, it definitely needs a little bit of pepper. Salt is close. Very, very close. Mustard is good. I'm going to add just a little bit more Old Bay, just a little bit. We eat a lot of, I wouldn't say a lot, but frequently I'll make some crab cakes at home. And because of the flavor profile of Old Bay, there's some people in the family that don't like Old Bay, so we don't use any Old Bay in here at all. And I think Old Bay is one of those Maryland traditions that McCormick has taken worldwide since they purchased the Old Bay company in the 80s.
Okay, so let me ask or answer some questions here. Let me see if I can get through some of these. Let's see. Question about using canned crab meat. Okay, so what would be the question about canned crab meat?
I think it was just how do we feel about using canned crab meat versus fresh?
So Canned crab meat is going to have a little bit more of how would I put it, like a processed taste. It's not going to taste as clean. I have used canned crab meat in the past, and it's not terrible. A lot of times, if you think about kind of what they were doing about pasteurizing the crab in that little container, they're doing the exact same thing in the can. The only real difference is that you have a different material, so you have that little plastic lined metal can on the inside. I find it gives a slight taste. I don't think it's terrible. Um, you're probably not going to find tons of jumbo lump in there, but it's not a terrible product. If you can get fresh, it's going to taste cleaner, it's going to taste sweeter. Um, and a lot of the stuff that you have here, these have been pasteurized pretty quickly and then brought right out to market within the week. So you definitely have a shorter lifespan on it. Anytime you go with the canning and the pasteurization in the can, yes, you're going to lose a little bit of extra degradation over that. But generally, it is a cooked product because it's inside and pasteurized within the can. It's then sterile. So as far as longevity goes, I give it props to that. I will still say fresh is always going to be a little bit better tasting though. It's not going to have that extra kind of nuance of been sitting in a can taste. Um, and the temperatures usually are a little bit higher to get to for canning temperatures than just standard pasteurization. So hopefully that answered that question. Let's see.
We have kind of a follow-up to that one from Jean. What flavors can we use to balance it if canned crab is all you have access to?
I would say then just go a little bit tinier, heavier on the Old Bay. That will mask a lot of mistakes or any issues. Old Bay is a fairly strong flavor. A lot of people love it, but Maryland, it's starting to get kind of a mixed review because one, it's a staple here in Maryland, but then it gets overused in Maryland. So that's why Chef was mentioning that some people in the family don't like having Old Bay because they've been Old Bayed since they were 2 years old. So. But by increasing some of your other aromatic flavors in your crab cake, you should be able to alter that a little bit. I would suggest going with a little bit heavier presence of Old Bay. It's not something that would be ununique in a crab cake, and it wouldn't be terrible if you were a little heavy with the Old Bay because it's so compatible with the flavor of crab. So that would be my suggestion for that one. The hat. The hat is called a chef toque. And it has 101 pleats in it up top, and those pleats are symbolic for 101 ways to cook an egg, and that every chef should know how to do. So that's about the hat. Difference between mustards. Okay, so Dijon and yellow mustard taste completely different despite being from basically the same product, mustard seeds. Um, I don't like using yellow mustard in like crab cakes and things like that because then it tastes too much like a hot dog and hamburger kind of palette and profile. Dijon for me is a little more subtle and doesn't have as distinct of that front note of that yellow ketchup or yellow mustard kind of taste. Um, when do you use Dijon mustard? I like using Dijon basically anytime that's not a hamburger or a hot dog. I don't know if that answers the question or whatever, but yeah, typically for me, I would go lean towards a Dijon or a stone ground mustard or something like that I think has a little bit more character. I find yellow mustard has a very unique flavor profile that I typically associate with like American comfort foods. So uh, that's kind of my premise about how I uh, use the mustards. Or make a meringue. Yeah, I'm just hoping to reheat my own. Okay. Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, so he saved an egg yolk to use in a custard, but he decided to use egg white. Um, so just a little topic on this, just as kind of what Chef did. He used, instead of breaking an egg and whipping it and using half of it, he just used the egg white. Um, you could definitely do that. I will say that that's going to give you a cleaner tasting crab cake. So for me, in my personal experience, when you start adding yolks, you gain a little bit more luxuriousness of it because that's where the fat is in the egg. And so you're adding a layer of fat within that egg mix that you're already putting in there. However, I find that a lot of the egg-like tastes, like sulfur and things like that, they all come from the yolk. So if you omit the yolk altogether and you're just using the white, you're still going to get the binding and the coagulation properties of the egg, but you're going to get a much less intense flavor profile from the egg itself. Let's see. Yes, and crab can be used in quiches. One of my favorite things in the world is an omelet from Thailand that's made with crab, just absolutely spectacular. Hot sauce, you can definitely, if you wanted to put hot sauce in this, you could put it right into this, or you could put it into your tartar sauce, or you can put it into a remoulade or something like that. Absolutely. Old Bay on corn on the cob, well, you're from Maryland, you put it everywhere. So, yeah, of course. On cauliflower and air frying, yeah, absolutely. If you've never had Old Bay, I mean, we are living in it since we're here in Maryland, but if you've never had Old Bay, give it a shot. It's a really interesting flavor profile. It's spicy and almost a little sweet tasting. There's no sugar, but it has those kind of little sensations in there, like the warm spices are in there. And they work really, really well with just about anything. So you can kind of kick up, any dish. It could be butter, potatoes, and parsley, and a little Old Bay, and you're fine. It's just a really fun thing, so you can kind of incorporate it anywhere you want. Okay, and recipe for crab quiche. Okay, and if you want a quiche, I suggest Thomas Keller quiche. That's my suggestion. We're going to go back to the video.
We'll give it one more taste, see how we're doing. I will need, much better. That little pinch of salt, I don't know if you noticed, and that little bit of pepper made an enormous difference in the flavor. Yeah, just a drop more parsley, if we have it. And now the key to preparing these crab cakes and having a good shape, John, could you grab a sizzle pan? I was going to use this, but the parchment fell. So I have my crab meat that's been picked and dried. I'm going to add just maybe 2 teaspoons of plain breadcrumb.
Not much filler.
I'm going to add just enough of my crab cake dressing to blend in and keep it moist.
See how
Take it off
gently
the
he's
ice
folding
so I
it.
can tilt it a little bit, and you'll be able to see what it looks like. So now I'm binding this together, and you can see it. I have quite a bit of my crab cake dressing left, but this is moist enough. We've picked through, so I have nice clean crab meat. If we had more filler, it would be a little bit tighter. If I had some, not just jumbo lump, but a combination of lump, special, or lump and claw, it would be a little bit tighter as well. But if you notice, I'm letting that breadcrumb hydrate. And as the breadcrumb hydrates, it's picking up the flavor from here. It's going to tighten this a little bit. We're going to create 2 crab cakes out of this, because I think that'll be plenty. Good size. Parchment paper or a little bit of spray, just to ensure that we have proper color. So at this point, we have to decide how we're going to shape, how we're going to mold. Normally what I would do, I would either get a ring mold and set it into the ring mold. I'm sorry, that's not what I would normally do in large quantity. Normally what I would do is get an ice cream scoop appropriate to the portion size that I would like. Because in essence, I could have 50 of these crab cakes. And I find the appropriate ice cream scoop, and I don't have to go to the scale each time. I figure out which one is my 4-ounce or 5-ounce portion, and then scoop it up. And then I would have my individual crab cakes, I like to give them a little bit of a mound. I have a good hot 400-degree oven. This is just so I can even them up. You can certainly, I mean, these are big crab cakes to serve if I was serving two. One crab cake I might use would be a 5-ounce crab cake. And now, this is what I was referring to where I'm going to make a glaze. I'm going to take a little bit of this dressing and put it right over the top. And what will happen is that topping becomes a glaze or a glaçage. And we do this frequently when we're making something that might have a cheese glaze on it, or a Mornay sauce could go over the top. And then when you bake it in the oven, you get that beautiful golden color. So I have a 400-degree oven. We'll start that in the oven. I'm going to set all this aside, except for the ingredients that we have for our tartar sauce. You might decide that you want to use a warm lemon herb beurre blanc with this, and that works extremely well. You can do a warm tomato salsa in the style of a cocktail sauce. And you want something a little sharp to go with the sweetness that we have. So again, this recipe will make a lot of tartar sauce, but it holds well. You could make, you know what would go well with this? The remoulade from the cod, fried codfish that we made in 121. So I have a little bit of Cornichon. You could use sweet pickle relish. You could use dill pickles in here, chopped up bread and butter pickles. I have a little bit of Worcestershire. This is all pre-measured according to the recipe. A few chopped Cornichon. I have a little bit of grainy mustard. If you prefer smooth Dijon, certainly you can use that. And I have a little lemon juice. I'm holding back a little of the acidity so I can adjust that. And I have a few tarragon leaves. I'm just going to rough chop this. And then once we mix this together, we'll have a sauce to serve alongside of our crab cake. Tarragon is actually one of the dry herbs that I don't mind using. The fresh, depending on where it's been grown, might not have much of a flavor, but I find that the dry tarragon seems to hold its licorice flavor a little bit better than many of the other dried spices and herbs that we use. I'm gonna add a little chopped parsley to this also. And then we'll give this a taste. So you can see we have quite a bit of chunk in here. It's not just a mayonnaise. So this would be mayonnaise as being the mother sauce, and then a smaller sauce created from that mother sauce. So let's see how the acidity is working. Could use a little bit more of the pickle. We do have a little acidity from the caper as well, because the capers have vinegar in them. So it's a combination of the two. And we definitely need just a little bit more lemon juice.
Can you describe what you're tasting when you say just needs a little bit more lemon juice? Can you describe what the balance feels like on your tongue?
Okay, so initially, this is a commercial product, the mayonnaise. And if I read the label, it's going to have either some high fructose corn syrup or a little bit of sugar. So when I say the balance, it came to a little bit too sweet. And I didn't have the balance of the acidity that went into it. It still needs just a little bit more, because remember, we want this to be complementary flavor to the crab cake. Standing alone is how we can interpret what that final flavor would be. So balancing, I'm looking for that tarragon, the sweetness from that. I'm looking for the creaminess, for the texture from the mayonnaise. I taste that little bit of grainy mustard, and it's one of the finishing flavors in my mouth. But it definitely needed a little bit more acidity, and the acidity would either come from the caper or from the lemon juice. So now I no longer have any sweetness whatsoever, but I am going to add just a pinch of salt. The caper comes through now, and definitely a little bit more pepper. The crab cake you can certainly prepare.
Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the sauce. So we just did a tartar sauce. Now, we know that the crab cake itself is crab that's been basically coated in a fairly fatty coating. So we already know that that has a fairly high fat content. Then we're going to be pairing it with a fatty sauce, but also pairs very, very well with that. So one of the things I really want to talk to you about is taste and your palate. When serving fatty foods, and like if you're frying something or whatever, you should really look at having things that are very high in acid or very sour, because sour counteracts the acid in your mouth and your palate as far as it goes, and it makes it much more clean. So for example, is if that sauce didn't have any lemon juice in it whatsoever, but you still served it with the crab cake, it would be so fatty, your mouth would just kind of blow out, and it would just be too much, and you just couldn't take it anymore. The acidity gives you enough brightness, it kind of causes you to salivate a little bit, and it allows you to kind of pass that fat out of your mouth a little bit better. So when you start looking at things that are like fried foods or anything like that, pairing it with something acidic works really, really well. You know, looking at pairing wines with meals. Certain wines can go very, very well with fatty foods because the level of acidity is there. So like if I'm serving a fish and chips and I really wanted to serve it with a wine, I'm probably going to use like a Pinot Grigio or something very light, a Pinot Gris, which is a much crisper, lighter kind of wine. So that's kind of what we're looking at. Here's a little tidbit for you as far as a cooking tip that you're not going to get told anywhere else. So the tongue is capable of tasting sweet, sour, bitter, salty, and umami. Those 5 things. We used to think that we predominantly only tasted them on one spots of the tongue, and that's not actually the case anymore. Scientifically, every nerve ending has the capacity to taste all of them. Now, what they don't tell you is that we can confuse our tongue by what it perceives by bombarding it. What I mean by this is there's a bottleneck that happens on your palate and your tongue. So for example, if I had something that was really bitter to taste, I can add sugar to that and it becomes less bitter, because you know all those little things that your tongue's trying to taste, if 2 of them are occupied by something else, then you can't taste the bitter as much. So how does this help you? If you ever over salt something, say you're making guacamole and you just put just a tiny bit too much salt, add a pinch of sugar and it will actually counteract the perception of salt. Don't add so much sugar that you taste sweetness. Add enough to where it's just in the background. It will actually kind of take away some of the sensation of over salting. So you can basically do that kind of thing. So if you over salt, you can add a little sugar. If you just happen to have bitters, you can do that as well. This also plays extremely well if anyone here likes making cocktails. Every time we make a cocktail, I'm always balancing. You know, I have usually my liqueur or alcohol, which is inherently kind of bitter, or a little astringent. But then I'm also adding bitters to my cocktails, which adds that layer of nuance. I'm commonly putting sour mix or some kind of sour element into it. And then there's lots of mixers and things like that that are sweet. So it's how you play and balance with all of those tastes on your tongue. So essentially what Chef is kind of really trying to illustrate is you really need to balance the different flavors as they kind of pair even within their sauce. But knowing that this sauce is going with something fatty, he's increasing the acidity levels a little bit more. So it's a little bit more intense so that when it gets paired with that dish, now they're complementary. So that's kind of where he was going with that. Do we have a question? Yes, dried tarragon is surprisingly decent. And what it really is that there's such a level of intensity of that licorice taste that it lasts longer and it doesn't degrade over the time. For example, like dehydrated parsley is worth nothing. I think I would rather go use grass clippings than dehydrated parsley. So things like that. Fresh lemons might not be available. Can white vinegar work as well? Absolutely. You could use anything sour. It could be a white vinegar. It could be lemon. If you don't have lemon packets, I use real lime lemon packets. Those kind of things. Those all should work. All you're really trying to do is get that level of intensity up a little bit more. Okay. Any other questions so far before I jump into seeing some really beautiful crab cakes coming out of this oven? Okay.
Prepare hours ahead. Don't glaze it until you're ready to put it into the oven is my recommendation. But we want to make sure that the egg is heated. The temperature of this finished crab cake for egg white is about 148 degrees is the temperature that egg white will coagulate. Let's see where we are. This has only been a couple of minutes. I want you to look at this carefully, and you can start to see a slight bit of glazing on top of that crab cake. And certainly it's evident right over here see it? That's where the egg white is starting to firm up, and that's what we're waiting for the interior to coagulate, firm up, and that way it'll give us a beautifully creamy interior with a tender, sweet, briny flavor and texture. Interior, we're looking for just under 150 degrees. This is just about ready. Can you start to see the beautiful glazing on top? That's why I put some of that dressing over the top, because I think it's visually it gives you so much of a more artistic finished product.
Amazing.
Okay, so and we still had plenty of that topping that went over it, and there's nothing wrong with putting this on a piece of parchment. I didn't do it because my parchment fell on the floor, but otherwise I would have. And I'm going to give this another 3 minutes in the oven. So this crab cake should be done now. Yes. And you can see the beautiful color that we end up. If we didn't put that glaze over the top, you would see the crab a little bit more, but we wouldn't have that beautiful glazing.
That looks amazing.
What I always like to do is let this rest for a moment so I don't break up the crab cake, and then take a fish spatula and instead of creating a plate with starch and vegetables, you can certainly do that if you would like for your family or your guests.
Like magic, you've done this before.
This did it yesterday for practice.
You used it.
So you can see how beautiful, and I do want to show you the bottom of the this. See how beautiful that crust is at the bottom? That's what we're trying to create, is to give this a little bit of texture. So the aromas are wonderful. And do I have a small spoon here? No. Let's use a larger spoon. And then accompanying this can be a wide variety of different sauces, or maybe a slice of lemon, some chopped herb, but just a really basic Maryland cuisine, tartar sauce, crab cake.
Okay. Okay. Do we have any questions so far? Before I kind of get into a little bit of a rundown. Hold on, I think we're gonna note. Let's see. Plating is enough to have me convinced. Yeah, I mean, if you're not impressed by that beautiful gratin top that was on top of those crab cakes, I mean, I don't know how else to sell it. Those things are probably some of the most amazing crab cakes I've ever had. So, naive to the food industry, I was curious about. Oh, okay. Yes, it is kind of worth asking if they are made from or made in house, or specifically where they get them. I know that there's a couple local places here in Maryland that sell their own crab cakes, and they could even supply them to restaurants. And in some cases, they might do that. For example, if you were like a TGI Fridays, or I mean, no, that's not a good example, but if you're just like a local place, you might want to invest in having them make it for you. Um, the ones that they are going to get, say Cisco, yeah, they're not going to be amazing. There's just definitely not the same level of care putting into that. The one nice thing though is with Cisco ones is that they can usually get them a lot cheaperly made, because they're doing them in bulk and they're doing them in batches. But you will probably find that Cisco uses more filler, because they need to make some profit off of this too. So you're going to increase the amount of breadcrumbs from the total of 3 teaspoons in that total recipe, which only some of it got used in the sauce, and that might go all the way up to like 6. Definitely go a lot higher. So I wouldn't recommend Cisco necessarily. I would try to go local. The taste is probably gonna be better too, because if it's coming from Cisco, it's probably been frozen already, or I should say refrozen after it's been made. So that's gonna have a pretty substantial impact on the taste. So I would definitely see if you can go fresh. If they don't have it, you might not order it. If you know it's coming from Cisco. Let's see. Make sure you get your recipe, please. Okay, we can work on that. Prepare a crawfish cake in the same way. Yes, absolutely. Crawdads work just as well. Crawdads are a lot more work as far as picking them. But if you're buying a bunch of crawfish meat, if you have access to that, which not everywhere you can find good crawfish meat, but if you do find some, yes, that will absolutely work. This recipe would work exactly the same. My personal opinion, I would probably switch out the Old Bay for some Zatarans and go a little more Louisiana style with it. But yes, it would absolutely work. What restaurants have crab cakes that I like in Maryland? Um, I am not an aficionado. I've only bought crab cakes here once. I've made crab cakes a few times. The ones you saw on camera, I ate and were delicious. Were my best and favorite. Um, but as far as local places that are around, I'm not terribly familiar. I'm a little bit of a transplant. I just moved here not terribly long ago, so I haven't had a chance to establish my crab cake roots yet. Yes, love Zatarans. Who doesn't love Zatarans? Okay, so let me kind of look at it. One thing I wanted to kind of leave you with as well, when you make your the sauce that goes on top of the crab, as well as the sauce for the tartar sauce or remoulade or something like that, make sure you taste as you go along. Chef mentioned that he probably would have tasted the crab. If you taste the crab, you're going to get a sense of how fishy, how crabby it is. You're also going to get a general sense of how inherently salty it is, which is going to dictate how much salt you're going to put into your binding mix, because that binding mix is essentially going to be the last layer of seasoning on your dish, and you don't want to have underseasoned or undersalted cakes. So that's your last chance. Always taste as you go. Chefs typically don't eat for at least an hour and a half after they cook, because we have the taste going throughout, or else, I'm not going to serve something that's just not seasoned correctly. Shapes, things I wanted to kind of mention. So you saw the shapes that he did. It just looked like he took a bunch of crab chunks and stacked them on top of each other until it was basically a half a baseball. That is the classic Maryland style. I don't know if you caught, and he's like, oh, I'd take a ring mold, now I'd put it down in the ring mold. That would be if you're going to look towards like the patties, um, or if you're doing it at home, kind of thing to what he's saying, because you would need, thousands of those little forms, ring forms, in order to do that in a restaurant. But like I said, the ones that are usually in patty shape have a lot more binder added. And the reason being is those patties have to be able to hold up to handling. So like picking them up, sauteing them in some butter, things like that. Um, these cakes are as delicate as they can possibly be. They were dressed in, like I told you, that coagulation binder, and it sets itself in the oven. So its shape isn't set until it's cooked. Where a lot of the crab cakes that you find around the country, the ones that are in patties and things like that, those patties are already pretty much formed, and they could pretty much hold up to a lot more abuse or handling and things like that. Let's see. The sauces, any classic sauce works. Like I said, the tartar sauce works really, really good. A remoulade works really fantastic. Even a really great vinaigrette can be great with this. The hot sauce that he was mentioning before was called a beurre blanc. A beurre blanc is taking, say, shallots, a little bit of salt, and some lemon juice, and you just warm it in some vinegar, and you warm it right up. And then while the pan is warm, you take it basically off the heat, and you just barely melt the butter in so it doesn't break, but it kind of turns into a new sauce. And so it's a warm butter sauce. It takes a little bit of skill. There's some hacks and cheats if you ever wanted to know, and you can email me if you ever wanted to learn how to do that. But that would be another awesome sauce to have on there. And let's see. Oh yeah, glazing and browning. There was one last thing I wanted to mention. So as he was cooking this, he was using a very high temperature oven, so like 425 degrees, I believe. If you notice that you're cooking your crab cakes and your oven temperature is too low, which means you're going to overcook the crab before your glaçage browns, then I suggest finishing it in the broiler. And maybe don't go to the highest rung of the broiler, go down one, and then give it a little bit of time under the broiler. That should give you some of the color that you need without risking overcooking the crab cake. You spent that much money on crab cakes, don't overcook them. So I think that's all I have. Does anyone have any questions for me? Have we demystified crab cakes?
I think there was one at the very beginning of someone being curious about the issue with bare hands and crab meat.
Oh, honestly, that's kind of a restaurant reference.
Mm.
Any prepared foods, meaning anything that doesn't get heated again, we have to wear gloves. That's just to prevent, even if we wash our hands, so on and so forth, we still have to wear gloves. As far as he isn't necessarily, he's on the fence as far as like a real answer to this. So yes, there is some issues with people like touching the crab, but they didn't cook their crab long enough. That's one problem. So for example, like if I accidentally touched some raw chicken, or in the midst of things and then touched crab, I would now need to heat this crab cake up to about 165 degrees in order to kill off that bacteria. That's going to be overcooking your crab cake. It's not going to be as good anymore. So in the restaurant industry, we use gloves as a mediator for working with things like this. So my suggestion for this one, wash your hands before you cook. I know it's simple, but it is what it is. Did that answer the question?
I think so. And I think that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, ready to eat foods and that kind of thing. We have to be super cautious in the restaurant industry, but at home, you are allowed to, cook without wearing gloves. So just be safe. Just wash your hands before you cook. Okay. Anyone else? Any other questions, comments, concerns? Okay. You say, I mean, are we,
I think we're good. If everyone is good, I appreciate all the comments in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now.
okay.